welcome to Adoptee Cuento Cuento, Filipino adoptees and our experiences told by us and for us. This is a space where we center the adoptee experience in the adoption process and we get to have candid conversations. So you just found out you were adopted, or you've always known that you were adopted and you're ready to kind of go down this path of exploring about adoption, what it is, and learn a little bit more about your own personal journey. Where do I go? What do I do? And who else is out there like us? I know when I found out about my adoption, I was lost and I had no idea really where to start. So today, we'll talk about 4 different points that will hopefully help you on your adoption journey. Our first point is really understanding on how we come to discover our adoption. Some folks are adopted by Caucasian parents, intercountry adoption, and perhaps maybe their family or even their community is an all Caucasian white community. There's an understanding that there's a difference between us as well as our adopting families. Or sometimes the adopting family, they may already have told the adoptees at an early age of their adoption. There's also late discoveries. So some folks were not told about their adoption at an early age, and so they find out a little bit later in life, or some never were told and they were discovered a lot later by circumstances. And I think by understanding how we come to find out about our adoption, it really does depend on how we start our journey and possibly our feelings about our adoption. I myself was a later discovery adoptee. I was told about my adoption at the age of 19. And I think that understanding when you have an awareness of your adoption, that really plays into what you perceive about your originating birth story, as well as how the circumstances of adoption is. I think in younger years, a lot of folks may not have a clear understanding of what adoption is, or you're told what adoption is. And so therefore, you're really probably simulating with that idea of what maybe the adoption community told you, your parents told you. And a lot of times, I think with later discovery, at 19, when I found out, I was just a ball of emotions, and I was old enough that I didn't have to be told of a story from my adoptive family per se. I was old enough to kind of research it myself, but it's interesting. I didn't really go down that path of understanding my own adoption story. I was taking my time a lot with it, because I think when, point 2, when you come to find out about your adoption, there's a lot of emotions with this. And that is something that we have to wrestle with, right? Whether it was an early discovery or early understanding of your adoption and what that feels as a younger child or a young adult, and where our placement is with family, or if it's an older adoption discovery and you just don't really know where to go with that. It takes time. Adoption stories, a lot of them, they may happen overnight, but a lot of us, we have to process it over time. And I think we may want to go full speed trying to learn about adoption and learning about reunion and finding our birth family. And I think when we dive into these things, a lot of times these emotions surface and we're not sure what to do with these. And I think it's okay. I think it's that we know that we're going to get these emotions, whether they're anger or sadness or confusion. What do we do with those emotions? It's a lot to process, and it's okay to feel those feelings. It's definitely not singular in that we're feeling angry about not being told, or maybe we have questions surrounding our origin stories and why were we given up. Those are very, very familiar to all adoptees. So it is quite okay to make known of these feelings. I wouldn't suppress those feelings, but what do we do with these? Because it's really a lot of questions that come up and feelings, and unless your adoptive family knows of your birth story, about your birth family, a lot of it is just unknown. And that's a lot to navigate, just understanding that there is just so much unknown, and a lot of this leads to additional questions. It is a lot to process. Others are in a space where they're not ready to dive in at all. And I think this is important to discuss, because as adoptees, there's a wide range where some folks are really, as they say, they're out of the fog of adoption. They're not seeing it all just as positive. But then there's a lot of positive stories where they've had positive experiences, and they're not necessarily looking for reunion, or they're not necessarily looking or identifying with the same feelings about adoption. I think it's important to understand that we each have separate feelings about it, and it's okay to feel. But how do we each take our emotions that we are having questions about? What do we do with those? Our emotions can't sit within our body. It's very important to process those emotions, those questions, those frustrations, those sadness. Point 3 is really to talk about, how do we get out those emotions? How do we process those emotions, our feelings, and then what do we do with them, and not letting the emotions fester into our bodies and sit there. And I can talk about my experience. I think I was a very frustrated and angry adoptee. Mine was a little painful to confront, and I was angry at my adoptive parents. I was angry at my birth parents, but ultimately I was just an angry person, being a young adult and ready to get out into the world. And I think I knew very much so when I first found out that I wasn't ready to tackle this. I was not ready to go into understanding adoption. I think I was probably a big ball of yarn, and that if you just touch the ball, it would just kind of all crumble. So I wasn't personally ready to, and mentally and emotionally, spiritually, I wasn't ready to talk or understand or read about adoption. So I found out at 19, and I think I carried my emotions inside, and I pushed it all off to a corner. And I said, I want to, when I'm ready to be in a space to talk about this, confront this, ask questions, I think that's when I'll revisit this. And I think I put it off for quite a bit of years. And part of it might have been fear. I was fearful for the information that I would find out, fearful of the emotions that I would continue to feel. So I think that as adoptees, we can be very open-minded to how others are being in their own space with adoption. And that's okay. We can have different timelines and different phases of life where it might be more suitable to go down this very confusing and really could be traumatizing once you start to peel back the layers. So what do we do with these emotions? We have the emotions sitting in us. I'm angry, I'm confused as a young adult. What do I do with that? And why is it important to discover, to look at? And it's important because as a young adult, because I didn't really address the feelings that I was having, I made a lot of bad decisions. A lot of bad decisions because I was running from items, running from something, and perhaps at least if I wasn't ready to go down the path of understanding my adoption, perhaps I should have at least dealt with the emotions of things, and being able to process them. So don't be like me and not at least address the feelings about it. Perhaps there's other things that you could do. There's a lot of things, and we'll kind of go through them throughout this process, and really discover how do each different adoptee, how did they process their feelings? How do they process their adoption information that they're going through their journey? And that's the beauty of our C series, is that we're able to hear how other adoptees do this. A couple of different examples: you could journal, right? You could journal, write, record your emotions, get them out, speak them out. Whether you're frustrated and you're recording it, or you're frustrated and you're writing it in a diary. It's therapeutic for some, but at least you're getting out what you're feeling. Others might like art journaling, or others might like doing different art therapies. There's therapies that are very helpful for us, that we can go to a therapist, or a trauma or adoption, very specific therapist that can help talk us through this process. The other part is, right, going and joining. There are a lot of classes that are available for art journaling or movement, processing your emotions. There's yoga. There's a lot of different ways to get out your tensions, your emotions, and expressing it in a way that is in a healthy way, in a healthy manner, to get out those frustrations or sadness, and then document them. What can I learn from them? And later years, when you're ready to kind of go a little bit deeper into adoption, and how that connects to the decisions that we make, the life decisions that we decided to do, you're able to look back and maybe see where you were at, at a certain point with your art journey or your therapeutic writing. So it's really great to find something that is able to be a healthy outlet for you. And again, you'll see in different episodes throughout season 2 of this, where we'll ask adoptees, how did you do this? How did you process this out? Point 3, connecting. As an adoptee, this is very important to understand that even though we are adopted, and some of us might have other family members who are adopted just like us, or some may not have any connection through adoption, and that's just something only with yourself. Find your tribe. It's important to connect, and you can have several members of a support team for you. What does support look like for you? You don't have to be alone in this journey, and hopefully we showed through the C series of season 1 that we have other adoptees that have been through this journey the same as you. We have plenty of different adoptees this season to show as well, but there's other resources out there to show and connect with, and it's important to connect because sharing each other's experiences and knowing, look, I'm going through this today, I'm feeling this today. And when you hear those things, it becomes a healing process, but it's also to be open-minded and connecting, that when you have some confusing times, some angry times, some sad times, to be able to connect with someone who understands your journey, understands your plight. It becomes more of an added on family, to maybe if you're, other than your adoptive family, your friends, there's a little small community that you can reach out to and say, I just want to talk. Can you listen? And I talked to so many adoptees over the last couple of months that each one of those conversations has been so healing in my personal journey, but I no longer felt like, well, I am alone in this. And that was powerful for me. Let's talk about at least some other groups that you can connect to. And these resources that we have, they are posted on our website, adopteecuentocuento.com. So feel free to take a look at that. But we have several resources that if as an adoptee, Filipino adoptee, that you can reach out to and connect with several different members of the group, or you can go in there and introduce yourself, and you have a question, you could post that. So our first, of course, is AKK, Adoptee Cuento Cuento. Reach out to us. We have an email, we have an Instagram. And also, if you go through the different seasons, you will see the different adoptees that have been showcased. Feel free to reach out to any one of the speakers. Amy and I are here, but there's a much greater community as well. FAN, Filipino Adoptee Network, is a Facebook group. They have a website as well, but FAN is really where a lot of us met, and a lot of adoptees all around the world have joined this website, this Facebook group, and we've been able to connect, and you will find hundreds of adoptees, Filipino adoptees that may have the same experience. So if you go onto Facebook and you request to join, you will have to indicate that you're an adoptee, but there's a lot of great people and a lot of great resources just in that group. So Filipino Adoptee Network, or FAN, as that's called. There is a European adoptee network. It's called SAT, and that's listed on our website. So that's not Filipino specific, but it is all Asian adoptees that are in Europe. So you'll find a couple of the Filipino adoptees in that group, all situated throughout Europe, and they have a podcast as well. So you can visit SAT. They have a Facebook and they have a podcast, and you can listen to the different Asian adoptee experience. Korean, Chinese, Filipino, and of course some more. If you're situated in the Philippines, there is also a Facebook group that is Adoptees Teen and Adults. You'll find that listed on our website. That group is very specific to adoptees living in the Philippines, and that's a really good start to building a community. They have a really strong presence and ties with the adoption committees and boards and organizations. So although that they're part of a larger organization, they do fortunately have a very specific group that's only for teens and adults. So great resources there. And there's also the Adoptee Cuento Cuento website will be updated all the time with different folks who are out there providing advocacy. So as I run across them, we'll be adding them to our website, but there's a lot of adoptees, Filipino adoptees that are on Instagram that are providing advocacy, and you can click on their web pages, their personal web pages, and see what type of work they're putting out there and hear about their journeys. I think this is important, and AKK really wants to support that because, again, we want to have a diversity of our own narratives. Some folks might see adoption in a light that others may have a different view, and that is something that we want to support. And by being able to at least look through the list, you're able to find someone where maybe they reside at where you're at in your current phase of your adoption story, and others, right, just to be able to understand how they came into their journey, their reunions. I know the reunion episodes are really pretty popular to look at and see some of the experiences that these adoptees have to go through. I think the final part, or point 4, is how do we research this? How do we get into research, whether it's our own personal journey that we want to research a little bit more about, or we just want to learn about Filipino adoption, inter-country adoption. I think research becomes, as long as we have the support in place, right, and we have a way to address the emotions that we're feeling, the research is where it's continuous, right? And our own personal story, we're always trying to build upon, or we're trying to understand maybe the circumstances and the nature of adoption. A couple things that come into our personal story is, do we want to find out about at least our basic paperwork, our adoption papers, or perhaps our birth certificates? Those are things to probably try to get access to. And we'll have some episodes that really talk about that after throughout season 2, where it talks about what documents are there, what other information that perhaps we can take a look at, but really just some basic information. A lot of that could be provided by our adoptive parents, or we could do with basic research. Those are a little bit important, and at least that's the start, right? Research doesn't just come by once. We're constantly looking for information about our background. And that can even be our background of understanding. If you're not tied into the Filipino community as much as often, right, how do we tie into understanding that, hey, I'm a Filipino American or Filipino European, and what does being Filipino associate, like what cultural ties are there, whether that's language or food or different strengths and characteristics. Maybe that's an understanding that you would like to learn more, identifying back to a Filipino experience. But of course, because we are in a country, it's a little bit different, right? We have a twist to being Filipino. And a fan can help you with that. Filipino Adoptee Network can help with that. They really like to support understanding how we connect to our culture, to our originating culture. There's a lot of research also online about the history of the Philippines and different cultural aspects to them. We'll be linking those as well to the website. So please check those out. But also, research can be about reunion. So I mentioned this earlier. Research can be about, do we want to find our birth family? And do we want to kind of dive down that path? Research can be DNA, right? Doing the DNA test and finding out if we have any connections that are out there. And honestly, there's varying diversity in that question as well. Some folks don't want to connect to that part of the story, and I think that's okay. We're all entitled to decide if we want to connect or we don't want to connect. And if we do, we have an episode coming up about reunion. It's okay to put that on the table when you're ready. It's okay also to say, I'm not interested in finding out about more, but I would at least like to just learn about my culture. that is acceptable, and not everyone has to go down those paths. We each have to decide for ourselves when we're ready for that, and if that's the story that we want to include in our personal narrative. And lastly, understanding about adoption. So adoption is very complex. There's some beneficial things, and there's also some little bit of a dark space with adoption. But hopefully you can find really great resources within your country, and it really depends on where you're at, whether you're in North America or you're in Europe or the Philippines. There's a lot of items that could be helpful in understanding about the processes of adoption, one in the Philippines and then two in your adopting country. That's something of a topic that's been very interesting for me, that I want to learn about. I want to learn a whole lot about. So I got a couple resources for that. I'm more interested in understanding adoption from the adoptee point of view, and not necessarily as much quite yet about from the adopter's point of view. I think when you research the internet, you find that a lot of the adoption.com, they cater to the adopting community, the actual families who are looking for children. And I really want to find out more from a perspective of the adoptee. So a couple resources, of course, you can always look at FAN. FAN has been building a great library of resources, and also ICAV, ICAV, Intercountry Adoptee Voices, is a organization where you're adopting between different countries, and that's centered on adoptee voices. Very similar to at least the videos that we do, but it's really connecting into not only the voices, but research and what that means in terms of adoption processes. And tons of resources there. And there's also AKA, Adoption Knowledge Association, I believe that's in the US. There's a couple of others that we'll be listing that are resources for adoptees in general, and you can find tons of that on the internet. And joining any one of those communities, even though they might not be a Filipino perspective, they'll be very helpful in your journey of learning what resources might be there for adoptees particular to that country, but they also can be just being able to talk about adoption and your feelings, right? It might, like I said, you might meet other Korean adoptees, Caucasian, African American, Hispanic, and Latino adoptees. There's tons of resources where being able to just connect with another adoptee can be very just healing. If you want to learn a little bit more that's specific to the Philippines, NACC, which was formerly ICAB, ICAB, but now it's NACC, they have a lot of documentation around how adoption works in the Philippines. We will have some episodes and some seasons that are a little bit more catered to this, so definitely tune into that, and you'll find that that might be a little bit interesting for you as an adoptee on what the circumstances, or at least what is the environment of adoption is in the Philippines. Adoption in the US and in different countries can look very different. The environments, the cultural environments of the adopting country can be very different. Even for those who are not in a country, if they're domestic adoptees, it could be very different experience and very similar. So to understand that, if that's of interest to you, all of those are just different points and resources that you can definitely use in your journey. I think that the biggest part and importance, if you take away from this video, is, right, it's an everlasting journey. We're going to go through this. It might come up in different phases if we start families, if we experience a loved one's death, right? We might be faced with asking questions or confronting, going to the doctor is something that I've heard a lot of from adoptees, right? And the doctor asks, well, hey, do you have any medical history? And, you're brought to answer questions that, brings you back to, I don't know, and I'm curious about this, and you can be. So again, it's a lifelong journey that adoptees go through, our adoption experiences, but we come up with a lot of questions and emotions, and how do we process that? How do we have a system for us that helps us stay healthy and process these emotions? Do we have a way to get it out? And then connect with help and therapies if needed, talking to your families if that's available, your adoptive families, or even if your birth families, if that's available, your friends, but adding maybe other adoptees and to the support team, your tribe, because that will help you along the way. I have made friends from FAN. I've made lots of friends from AKK, and to this day, when I'm having a tough day, a great day, reaching out, that's been such a help to me. So it is my hope with these couple of tips, our 4 tips, that you're able to navigate your adoption story a little bit. There's tons of resources out there and other adoptees that can support you on your journey. And remember, again, it's a lifelong journey. It's okay to pick it up, review it, talk about it, and then if it gets a little bit much, we can put it down, and that's okay. And when you're ready to pick it back up, you can. Feel free to visit our website, adopteecuentocuento.com, and you'll find a list of other adoptees and organizations that we talked about today, and our show notes that list all these resources for you. If you like this episode, please click the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also check out our playlist of Adoptee Cuento Stories, our C series, up here, and watch different videos of adoptees. And you can also check out our last episode that we did last week for our season 2 here. Thank you to all of our viewers. Thank you until next time. Paalam.